Wherever you are in the world, welcome to the live stream, whatever time zone you're in. Formula One fans, globally, let's talk about the sport we love. Lots going on in terms of the World Championship because Max Verstappen seems to be in the game again, doesn't he? Wow, I'm sure there'll be lots of comments about that. And yeah, you know, Baku, a very significant race. I wouldn't have said it was a great race. I guess I would join the throng in saying there wasn't quite enough overtaking maybe, but you know, it was a pivotal race potentially in terms of the World Championship, with neither McLaren scoring well or scoring at all, and Max maximizing it as he often does. But lots to talk about that, I'm sure. Before we start, I always like to do something a little bit off. It's not off track at all. It's completely related to the sport we love, as I said earlier. But look at this lovely latest piece of artwork by our friend Martin Tomlinson. This was to celebrate Sterling Moss's birthday, which actually fell on September 17. So it's a while since it's been a while since I've had a chance to show this, but he painted that in memory of Sterling, and that's Sterling in the Intercontinental 2.5 litre Cooper, Rob Walker Cooper, Brands Hatch 61 Guards Trophy. He was quick on the pole that day. He didn't win, but it was the last Intercontinental race. It was the team owners telling the FIA long before commercial rights existed that they didn't actually think the new 1.5 litre formula was going to work that well, and they would continue to race the 2.5 litre cars in non-championship events and bracket them around their own little championship, the Intercontinental Formula. Well, it wasn't really a championship, it was just intercontinental racing. And actually, Nigel Roebuck, another dear friend, and a Sterling Moss expert. I don't think there's anybody on the planet Earth who knows more about Sterling and respects Sterling more than Nigel Roebuck in terms of rating him in the history of the sport and how highly he rates him. Reckons that the Intercontinental race held at Silverstone at the start of 61 in the wet was potentially Sterling's greatest drive. And this is the background of Monaco 61 and Nürburgring 61 and lots of others. But yeah, Intercontinental. Anyway, back to, should we say reality? Back to modern times. Let's have a look at the questions. I think there are lots already piling up, which is great. So we'll get straight into it. First in line. I mean, by the time I get through the live stream, I think I barely touched those who are actually joining us live. So my apologies in advance if I don't get to you, but I can't talk forever. And I'm sure none of you want me to talk forever. And so I will just do the best I can. And, you know, and this is the sort of traffic jam at the beginning. From Mabupe. Hello again. After watching your breakdown of Rascasse, it's interesting, going back to Monaco, I'm very interested. Is there a difference between a corner that is more interesting during qualifying versus the race and vice versa? Oh yeah, there's always a big difference, really. It depends on the corner, of course, but if you take Rascasse at Monaco as a good example, where the race is always sort of 4 seconds off the pace, then going into Rascasse, you can basically do whatever you want because you're just inevitably going to be blocked by whoever's in front of you. And if he's taking a wide entry, you can sort of go a little bit down the inside, but it doesn't mean anything. And so you just kind of fall in line. And generally speaking, in the race compared with qualifying, you take the sort of traditional wide entry line that everybody, I'd say 70% of the field use these days. And that's because it creates a groove. There's a bit of debris, marbles offline, whatever you want to call it. And we saw that at Monza, you know, coming out of Ascari, when I'd made the point that to be really perfect there, you just stay on the line and then move across at the last comfortable minute, a la Charles Leclerc or George Russell, and to some extent Max, then, and not like the Tim McLaren drivers. But in the race, everybody's sort of just doing that because, as I say, 70% of the field. Dexter, what are you doing? Dexter barking at somebody mowing the lawn, I think, yeah. Again, it's the pool man or the gardener, whatever. Dex has no offence, he's just telling us. He's very good at going out on patrol every sort of 15 minutes just to make sure everything's okay. Anyway, thank you, Dexter, for that one. So you just follow whatever the car in front is doing, partly to be in the tow and partly because it's cleaner. So above all, you want to avoid going over debris. So that's what that is. I mean, Rascasse is a fascinating corner in qualifying on their own, because you're braking from relatively high speed into an increasing radius right-hander. And there's lots of opportunity there to show your skill of braking under lateral load and therefore shortening the corner as well, if you can get away with it. And you can gain a lot of time there, as Max Verstappen proved when he got the pole, was it 2 years ago? Just on that section of road alone. And so it's always a brilliant place to watch. Very, very rarely do we actually see that captured by television cameras these days, given the positions they're in. But it's a great place to watch. But in the race, even a guy like Max, if he's stuck behind, I don't know, if he's stuck behind a George Russell or a, whoever, he's not going to be quite as precise. He's going to be precise. He's not going to be quite as short, I don't imagine. He's just going to be sort of looking at trying to force the guy in front to make some sort of mistake, I guess. That's more what you would do there. But it's a great corner in terms of on your own in qualifying, or even untimed practice. So, yeah, thank you for that one. Very good. Sarosh Soman. I actually enjoyed watching Antonelli the most on onboards. I actually thought that his low-speed corners looked better than Max and Leclerc. Must be crazy, but it looks superb. Yeah, as I've said, he is very, very good on slow corners. Very good. He's a kind of sort of product of these times, the 2023, 2024, 2025 simulator generation. Once you've got your F1 deal and you're able to go and do lots of work and sim with a good Formula One team, then absolutely for sure you can be pretty good. And I'm not saying that he learned his short corners and any of that deft touch that he has on a sim, not at all. But it's enhanced what he's able to do, and he's got a great natural talent on slow corners, medium speed corners. Very, very good. As I've said many times, I think the problem he has, the problem that visually he seems to have is when it gets to be quicker than that, and he's not able to drive through Copse Corner at Silverstone the way Max drives through Copse Corner at Silverstone, which is basically a high-speed version of what he's doing on slow-speed corners. Whereas Kimi tends to become more spiky and a little bit more edgy, body language becomes a little stiffer, and that's something that he needs to progress into, I think. And whether or not Mercedes are highlighting that now in his growth, I have no idea. I suspect not, but I hope they are, because if he can translate what he does on slow corners into quick corners, then he will be a seriously good racing driver going forward. So Ross, what is going on here? Why is this not working now? It's always the way, isn't it, with this thing? Sarosh Soman, I'm going to read this one out. He's got 3 questions, so I'll read this first part out. Peter, Formula One showed top 10 overtakes of Mansell. It didn't have any from the 85 Portuguese Grand Prix. His overtake of Senna at Spa in the wet, 91. Surely they must be there. Your views, please. Well, I don't think 85 Portugal, the cameras were never on Nigel. They were only on Ayrton, as far as I can remember. Well, I wasn't watching it on TV anyway. I was there, but I can imagine they were only on Ayrton and kind of, what was going on around him. And Nigel was coming up through the back of the field. Apart from anything else, it wouldn't have been great television anyway, because it was just balls of spray. But if you were there watching it, and indeed working at Williams as I was, then that was just one of the most amazing drives that you'll ever see. Again, I think Spa, Senna, I think if that wasn't there, that would be just either poor editing or again, they didn't catch it because they were so busy with all the pit stops going on, and they probably didn't have the production facility in those days to be able to to pick and choose what they wanted. And there were a lot of pit stops going on for tyres at that point because of the weather, and there was Nigel doing what he did to Ayrton. So it just shows, don't always look at Wikipedia or what's on video to decide actually what happened, because there's quite a lot out there that did happen that nobody ever talks about. Sarosh Soman again. I wasn't surprised in Leclerc crashing. He looked to be on the edge right from FP1, like he felt pressurized to be on pole based on his past performance. It was short corners but ragged. Yeah, well, if you called it before he hit the wall, good luck. I personally was shocked that he did that he made that mistake. And I have no real, apart from what you've said, he looked to be Does Leclerc look ragged? I didn't think he looked ragged. I thought he looked like Charles Leclerc, and he had a car quite capable of being on the front row, if not on the pole, for sure. I think he could have gone out and done the max lap right at the end, but he just they're saying it was the crosswind, but that's schmaltzy, isn't it? Because everybody had a crosswind, including Max. A, B, if anybody can handle a crosswind, it's Max and Charles. So, please advise. And I don't know. I can't say any more than that. I was shocked, and I think Leclerc has shown more of a chink in his armour than I thought he had under pressure in those situations with all the variables in play compared with Max. And as I said in the chat with Cameron on Monday, I think that what we saw in Baku was Max taking yet another small step forward in terms of his overall ability as a racing driver, and what he had on display in Baku was not only the normal Max, it was the Max who can handle all these variables, the wet, the drizzle, the crosswind, and all the demands of Baku. Make a mistake and you hit the wall. And at the same time, I think Charles took a step backwards, which has enhanced actually the margin now. I think Max is clearly the number one driver in the world, as distinct from, say, 2 years ago when I was saying he and Charles, and back in 21, Lewis as well, were pretty much equal. But I think Max has got the edge now on both of them. And I think for different reasons. As I've said all along, Charles had a different career to Max, completely different. It's all shrouded in emotion and high tension and having to deliver under pressure time and again and living under the Ferrari stress, whereas Max has had a much calmer, more logical UK team progression with very good guys like Wheatley or Jonathan Wheatley or Paul Moynihan in his ear, and those guys are just so good. And his whole race engineering team on the pit wall. I mean, they're very impressive people to listen to. Very calm. Another one from Sarosh says, I noticed that whenever Hamilton or Sainz previously goes quicker, Leclerc on board next shows him to be a bit ragged until he gets unsettled. He should be intelligent enough to understand that he is naturally talented and not allow the emotions to get better off him. Maybe someone a Prost can advise him. Yeah, every racing driver is different. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe Alain would be a good guy to talk to about that. Alain had his shortcomings as well, but yeah, he was very good under pressure, very calm. But then, he had his days when he was beaten by Ayrton, beaten by Nicky, and that's not something Leclerc would ever want. He would never want to be beaten by Lewis Hamilton at any point. So, I think it's more just that he's always had this emotional thing. And as I said in the video after the race, I'm just looking back now to remind myself, he started on softs and then they switched him to mediums for those last runs. And I'm not convinced that that was the right thing to do in those circumstances with so many variables. If you look at Lewis, who's on softs all the way, and it didn't work for him either, but for different reasons. But if you look at Max, mediums the whole way until he was obliged to run that new set of softs right at the end of Q3 for that one lap. But Max just had that same feel from the medium, whereas Leclerc was going, he was going from one compound to another, and he had all the variables. And for sure, the Ferrari's a more edgy car to drive than a Red Bull now, and certainly than a McLaren. So, yeah, but it was it was an understeery, just going in too quickly, tyres possibly not 100% there. I don't know. It was not pleasant to watch, was it? Jez James says, hi Peter, I think Rob Wilson is so correct when he said rally drivers have to be more creative. They do. Walter Roll said, I don't do this sport for money. I want to know if I'm a dreamer or not, i.e. being super creative. Yeah, well, that's right. They got all these things. They never know what's going to happen around the next corner. The grip changes, the way the track has evolved, the road has evolved, gravel, tarmac, whatever it is, weather conditions, and they can only do so much on the recce's, and they're limited in speed. So, they're not going to be they're going to be okay. But quite often you have guys like Kalle Rovanperä or Terry or even Sébastien Ogier saying, well, you know, I made a pace note error there, which means that they didn't get, in terms of extrapolating what that section of road was going to be like at full speed, they got it slightly wrong. So there's so many things there. You're building in these variables. And, yeah, you know, and Rob loves rallying, and he's worked, as he said, with a lot of rally drivers and done a very good job with them. Aaron Lee says, hi Peter, did any Australian or British drivers have a preference for the shifter to be on the left-hand side, but where everyone's shifter is on the right-hand side anyway? Or BRM typically certainly in the early 60s had the shifter on the left, and most others were on the right. Quite often they'd offset the steering even to accommodate the shifter on the right. So I can't remember a Lotus in which the shifter was on the left, but BRM certainly had shifters on the left. But I don't think it was that much of a problem. I mean, Graham Hill drove plenty of cars jumping from the BRM into Porsche sports cars, other Formula One cars, as did many drivers. And Graham particularly had no problem whatsoever with that. And it was never a talking point whether it was better on the left or the right. I once asked Mauro Foghieri why the 330 P4 Ferrari sports car, his most beautiful creation, maybe the most beautiful creation of all time in terms of sports cars, had the steering on the right, why it was right-hand drive. And he said, it was because most circuits are predominantly right-handers and they wanted the weight on the inside of the corner. Interesting. And nobody worried about that either. Left-hand drive, right-hand drive. Any more than we do today? I wonder if, somebody made the point, which I still haven't clarified, whether or not somebody who's a left kicker or a right foot kicker has an advantage with left foot braking or disadvantage. And I'm wondering whether somebody, left or right-handed person had an advantage in terms of the position of the gear shift. Again, I've never heard anybody talk about that, but I've never really spoken to anybody about it. It's a good point. I should do that. Do a complete video about it. Jez James, hi Peter. I find it unbelievable that Keke Rosberg's 160 mile an hour Silverstone lap in 85 has only been beaten by 4 seconds by Max at Monza this year. That means Formula One has advanced just 1 second per decade. Well, you find that unbelievable. It wasn't long ago that I remember listening to the BBC News at the time when I lived in dreary old England, and some person was complaining that their great-grandfather used to get the train from Brighton to London in a certain time, whatever it was. It was something like 3 minutes quicker than it was when I was listening to the news broadcast, probably late 90s. And of course, it's the way of the world, isn't it? Everything gets slower, heavier, bigger, SUVs, and it's all because we made the tracks a lot slower in general. Think about Silverstone 85. It was Copse was quicker. Or was it? No, I think it was tighter, actually. Copse was tighter, but then Beckett's was quicker, probably. The entry to Beckett's was quicker, I think. And then Stowe was definitely very quick. It was definitely top, probably. I think Club was flat. You didn't even brake for Club. Just, and then there was the Abbey curve, the kink, which was flat. And then they came into the chicane. No, that last bit, yeah. So, the track was so much quicker. And don't forget also, they've slowed cars down a lot in many ways too. So, yeah, that was, what are we talking about, 85? It's got to be 1,000 horsepower Honda V6 turbo engine, beautiful little Williams FW10, before the 10B actually. So that enhances the quality of Keke's lap. I remember watching that. He literally was smoking. And Patrick was sort of saying, no, you've got the pole. And he said, no, I can go quicker. And just cigarette on the ground, stamps it out with his foot, climbs into the car. Whoa. Alessandro Durango, yeah, very sad to hear that Jock Clear is leaving Ferrari. That's, I'll have to find out what happened there. It's not a great thing. And I don't know, I suspect it's part of the whole Lewis Hamilton thing. He worked with Lewis at Mercedes very successfully, and he was very much into Lewis when he joined the team and helping him along, working with him, as distinct from working with Charles. And he was kind of more Lewis. I don't know. We'll have to find out. It's not a great thing at all, because I really rate Jock as a person, which I think is always very important in racing, and B, as somebody, as an engineer who can think beyond the pit lane and thinks into the way the driver's mind works and into the way other sports can perhaps teach something to Formula One people. So anyway, we wish Jock well, and we'll catch up with him pretty soon and talk to him. Jonathan Lancelot maybe. Since Max is more of a short corner driver and most of the drivers brake at about the same point, I feel like his initial brake release comes earlier because of where he chooses to turn in. Yeah, I mean, that's right. But don't forget, he's not braking into the turn-in point. He's braking into the rotation point. And that's a big point. Excuse the pun on the points. So you can never... I mean, he's extending the straight when others are looking at a point. They're braking to the end of the straight, if you like. Whereas Max is extending the straight. Maybe he's getting on the brakes slightly earlier, but he's not braking as hard when they're braking hard. So it's very, very difficult to compare the way Max brakes and at what point he really slows the car down with that of, say, a Carlos Sainz. And that's where all those graphics on screen are very misleading. But in general, Max is not interested in massively late braking. He's only interested in stability that allows him to extend the straight for as long as he can before he then brakes against the lateral load that's all now in the car, because he's turning the steering slightly. And at that point, that's when he creates the corner. And that's when he's feeling the moment of rotation and where that's going to be. And he's just braking down to that point. Whereas I suspect drivers who brake in a straight line with a wide entry, that's generalizing a bit. They don't always brake in a straight line, of course. The corner can sometimes lead them into a braking, trail braking. But in general, they are thinking brake as late as possible. The more I'm on the power, the quicker I'm going, and then I must brake as hard as possible because I want to get on the power as soon as possible. That's not how Max thinks. Max thinks, I've got to create the corner so that I've got the rotation point exactly where I want it, and then get my nice clean exit and extend the straight on exit. And he's looking for stability, and he's obviously looking to, once he knows where that rotation point is, he's just trying to turn into that point in the shortest possible way, given the front end grip of the car, given the way he's braking and accelerating and using the steering. There's no cut and dried, hard and fast framework around which Max Verstappen drives. It's all feel, and it's all changing every corner. Same gentleman, Lancelot Jonathan, does that mean to turn in earlier you need to release the brakes earlier as well? Well, it's not a question of releasing the brakes, it's how you release the brakes. As Rob Wilson said, I don't know if you've listened to the interview we did with him, it's all about the rate of input. And there's no point, if you've got really good steering feel through the rim, through your fingers, and you think you've got the trajectory perfect, there's no point then of just coming out of the brakes and getting onto the throttle as soon as possible, because it's all part of one package. And what you're saying, does he need to release the brakes earlier as well? In a sense, he's releasing the brakes almost from the moment that he's applied them, but he's releasing them at exactly the rate that the car can take, given the trajectory he wants into his rotation point. He's never releasing them at a faster rate than that. It's all about the rate of input. It's about the rate of application of the brakes. Remember the sofa analogy? You don't just push a sofa, you do that with a sofa. From one side of the room to another. It's all about that, and it's all about the way you come out of it as well, as indeed with steering, the way you come out of the steering and the throttle as well. It's all about in and out. It's all about rates of input. That is the key. I mean, and we talk about short corners. Probably more apt is to call it rates of input. And who has the almost perfect rates of input in Formula One? Max Verstappen. And when you look at a driver who's quite spiky, and they're energizing the rear going in, and they're braking in a straight line, wide entry, that's when you say the rates of input are not commensurate with what the car's doing. And the result will be either a mistake that will lead to a spin, or it'll be overusing the tyres, or it'll be locking up an inside front. It'll be all those things. So rates of input are the key. Again, same gentleman. Hey, Peter, do you know James Voles, I think, talked high of Sainz before signing him last year. So glad he was the one that gave him his first podium in the team. Yeah, you know, it wasn't difficult to talk highly of Carlos Sainz at the beginning of last year. We all did. I mean, the guy was a winner, and he was quite capable of taking the race to Charles Leclerc at Ferrari, and he didn't deserve to be dropped by Ferrari. And so, yeah, it wasn't difficult to be praiseworthy of Carlos. We all are, and we all still are. And congratulations to him. I think if he'd gone to Sauber, he might have got a podium by now as well. He might certainly. I think he would have. You know, so it's not as if Williams have created magic. I think the other option he could have gone to was Jonathan Wheatley and Sauber, projecting into Audi, and that's the critical thing there. And I think that car's pretty good, and the team's pretty well run as well. But you know, each team has its circuit, as we said at the start of the year, amongst the midfield, and some of them don't have the building blocks or the capacity to be consistently good at every track. And that's why you hear them saying, oh, we didn't think we'd go very well there, or we didn't go very well here, and blah, blah, blah. You know, excuses, really. But yeah, I think, you know, obviously a great result for Carlos. Very pleased for him. Very, very pleased for him. And very pleased it happened on a day, more importantly about the Williams thing, much more importantly, it happened on a day when it was a disaster for Ferrari, and he thrashed them both. And that was good. You know, being up on the podium, looking down at Ferrari, I think for Carlos would have been, and I hope a lot of people in Maranello were watching that, because, you know, he didn't deserve to be sacked. Lots from you, Lancelot. Anyway, we'll keep going. Hey, Peter, instead of that young driver test they do at the end of the season, why don't they have a young driver race draft where they give all the young drivers Formula One cars to race at the ending? Yeah, well, that'll never happen, but it's a good, you know, I'd love to see it. I mean, that's a distillation of my idea that I've banged on about for several years now, that they should have a second tier world championship of all for young drivers, but all the Formula One teams are associated with it, and it's the previous year's car or 2 or 3 years car before that, and it's a separate world championship with its own TV rights, its own commercial entity, and it goes to a lot of the countries that want to be on the Formula One World Championship calendar but either can't get on yet because they don't have the money, or they can't find the space to get on at a time when they want to be on. To encourage Formula One in those countries, you get lots of regional drivers as well, and we have this second tier World Championship. And it's a bit like, you know, the Challenge Tour in golf, or the Masters Tour in PGA Tour golf, and they do it in tennis as well, except for it's for the older boys in those sports. I'm saying it should be for the younger here, because we don't accommodate them anything like well enough. And if they can't get a Formula One drive, they very quickly go off to WEC or IndyCar or Formula E, and that's not good. Not good for Formula One. I mean, it's okay for them, I guess, but it's not good for them either, really, is it? Because you don't want to see really talented drivers that should be in Formula One racing in wherever, you know. And so I think we should do that. So there we go. Omar Al-Tayer, Peter, hope all is well. Do you think top-level drivers would benefit from understanding the physics at hand when driving a car at its limit? Would it change how they drive? I think all Grand Prix drivers benefit from keeping things very simple. You know, keep it simple, stupid. KISS is always a good mantra to have. And the more you try to talk to them about physics or sports psychology, the more complicated it gets. Keep it simple. Look at the Max Verstappen example. You just look at the things that are going to directly affect you based on your knowledge of how you drive and what you can do with the car. And a lot of it is looking deep inside yourself and understanding who you are as a racing driver and what your talent is and what you're not quite so good at. And I think that's the failing of many drivers. They very good at listing what they're good at, late braking, very good at overtaking, very fast, good in qualifying, whatever they might want to say. But how good are they at listing all the things that aren't so good? And of course, they're all human beings. And you, if you really sat down with Max in a private moment and you were talking about his driving, and you said, what don't you think you're that good at? Where could you improve? He for sure would have 4 or 5 areas where he knew he could improve still more. And so that's what it's all about. It's about being very simple and honest with yourself and understanding the way you drive. And I made this point many times, and I'll make it again. I think it's more difficult now for drivers of this era to understand how they drive than ever before, because there's so much data and so much engineering clobber around their side of the garage that it's very difficult to distinguish between what the driver's doing naturally and what they think the car is telling them to do, and therefore is a shortcoming of the car. And that's the problem. Before we had so much data, it was relatively simple. And I think drivers were more self-critical then as a result. But today, a driver can hide, without knowing it, he can hide behind the data and be convinced that he's the fastest guy in the world, if only he had this, 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 and this. And that's the problem in terms of how to develop as a driver and how to be a faster, better racing driver. Too much information. Aldous Huxley. So your question is, would it change how they drive if they had... No, well, I don't think it would. I think it would make it worse, actually. I think that it's all about feel. It's all about feel. It's all about rates of input. And rates of input are not a thought. They're not the result of a thought process. They're a result of a feel reflex process. And many drivers use reflexes the wrong way. They use reflexes to correct a mistake. The back end suddenly snapped out. Great car control. That's fine. All good racing drivers have that. But the other reflex is a mentally driven reflex based on the feel of the car on the surface of the road and having exactly the right rates of input from the throttle, the steering and the brakes without thinking about it. And that is the art. That's very difficult to do. You can be born with it, like Max Verstappen, like Charles Leclerc, I think like Lewis Hamilton, probably like Isaac Hadjar. But below that level, and some others as well, but below that level, it's more mechanical. It's more, this is the point, this is where I want to turn in. Oh, the car's got understeer. Oh, I need to get that fixed. They're not adjusting. They're not adapting naturally to it. And so they feel more understeer than a great driver would. Omar Altair again. Could you please share more of what happened between Fernando and Felipe at Ferrari? Well, I have to say I really only know this from Felipe's perspective, which basically in a nutshell is that it was a really, really good team. Everything was working harmoniously in the post-Michael era, Kimi era even. And when Fernando arrived, it was like, this is Felipe, I'm basically condensing what Felipe said to me. When Fernando arrived, it was a bit like, right, this is how it's going to be, this is how I want it to be, this is the shake-up, I'm Fernando Alonso, no, I don't want that, don't want this, blah, blah, blah. And he said within half a season, the whole team had basically fragmented. And he wasn't referring just to top management. He was thinking of the boys in the garage, boys and girls in the garage and so forth. That's only Felipe. You know, I'm sure Fernando has his own story, which is that he came in, asked for a few things, probably they weren't done and couldn't understand why they hired him if they didn't want to listen to him. I'm sure there's a Fernando side of the story as well. But what he didn't do was what Kimi did, which was basically just plug himself into the Michael Schumacher system and say nothing, do nothing, don't touch, win a world championship and disappear. You know, and I think, you know, it's not the first time Fernando's done that, of course. So but I know Felipe was basically heartbroken that the team was so quickly, ripped apart. Muzzy T. Both Lando and Oscar will be accidental champions. I don't see either as a worthy champion. You see, everybody, there's a lot of races. And now this is post-Baku. And admittedly, if you came down from Mars or Jupiter or Saturn or any of these great planets and you watched your first Formula One race, you wouldn't think, and then it was Baku, you wouldn't think, Oscar Piastri, world championship points leader. You wouldn't think Lando Norris, the guy that might beat him to the championship. But it's only one race. Give him a break. And I think Oscar, I mean, this will be, as I said, after Monza, we need to wait for Baku to see whether or not the Red Bull pace is real, whether that floor is going to work on a different sort of circuit. It does, and so therefore we can say the pace is real. Red Bull have a lot more pace now than they've had all year. They're much closer to McLaren than they've ever been. I still think McLaren's the best car, but Red Bull's not far away. McLaren probably a little bit more consistent, more drivable still, probably a little bit better on its tyres. But I think you could also say that Singapore's coming up next. And before we jump on Oscar's back, let's see how he goes in Singapore, because he could be the sort of driver, and I think he is, because he's got this sort of laconic Frank Gardner, Jack Brabham, Australian. Yeah, okay, well, that was Baku. Let's move on, mate. And I think he'll use Baku to be brilliantly good around Singapore. That's my gut feeling, and I think he could go have a great race in Singapore. But we'll see. It's the McLaren will be a great car around there. It didn't start well for him with that long delay in FP1. And I'm assuming when I say that about Singapore that he doesn't have a similar delay there, or have to let some young guy drive the car for him, because on a street circuit, even if it's green and even if you're second off your own pace because it's green and you're just finding your way, letting the track come to you, it's still good stuff to have. It's still good road dust to have as you're moving forward into FP2, FP3 with fuel maybe. All those things build up on a street circuit more than a normal circuit. And Oscar didn't have that. It was mitigated a bit by that business in FP1 when they had the curbs breaking up, and I think it was 27 minutes or something when the track was stopped. It was red. And that mitigated the problem he had, because by the time the track was open again, he was there in the pit lane queue ready to go out. So it could have been worse for him. But I think that put him a little bit behind the 8-ball, and then he's a bit oversteery. He's looked more and more oversteery than he has at earlier races. So we'll see whether that is a bit more contained around Singapore. We'll see. As for Lando, I mean, I'm not going to put words into his mouth because sadly he's no longer with us. But I know if James Hunt had been doing the TV commentary for Baku, I'm pretty sure if James is doing the TV commentary for Baku, he would have been very, very critical of Lando Norris's drive. Lack of fire, lack of aggression, lack of wanting to take advantage of a situation in which both Ferraris were slow, as slow as he was, but he should have got well away from them. He should have beaten Yuki Tsunoda. I can hear James saying that, and so on, and he didn't do any of that stuff. And it's very easy to say, well, difficult to overtake. He was in a McLaren. He wasn't in even a Red Bull. He certainly wasn't in a Sauber or a Williams. He was in a McLaren, and that's a good car. It's a very, very good car. And I think Lando just kind of, because he's not a short corner driver, he wasn't really doing a lot different from those around him. He was probably seeing Charles doing a little bit, but once Charles got him at the restart, which was Lando half asleep, obviously, I'm sure he was looking at what Charles was doing in the car. He was probably just thinking, oh, what a mistake. I need to get past this guy. And yeah, he beat both Ferraris, but it was tough going. And that more than Oscar, I think, was not a good drive. It's one race. There's so many races, though. Should that have a bearing on whether he's a worthy world champion? No, I don't know. It's how you perceive world champions, I think. Depends what you mean by worthy world champion as well, because in the old days, my days, I suppose I should say, a world champion was not only considered worthy based on how he'd won his championship and the races he drove, he was also considered worthy based on how he was going to be an ambassador for the sport, particularly over the winter, of what he was going to do for charity, how he was going to visit various places and represent the sport as the leading figure of Formula One. That seems to have gone away now. People don't really care what they do over the winter, and being an ambassador for the sport no longer is considered to be part of the world champion's makeup. But I think that's sad. I think the world champion should consider himself to be an ambassador. And one of the duties always was to write the forward to auto course. Looking forward to that very much. And then what about the days when Ayrton Senna used to fly on his own expense and his own bill, used to fly to Bologna to go to the Autosprint magazine Golden Helmet Awards because he just loved Autosprint magazine. He liked the Autosprint guys. That doesn't happen anymore either, does it? That sort of thing. Strange. Adam, next year, most will see Max as the best driver, if not the champion. Can you think of other moments in Formula One where a driver wasn't champion but was still widely regarded by fans, insiders as the best? I think so, yeah. Sterling Moss throughout his career almost. You know, how many races did Sterling win? Sterling won 24% of his World Championship races. He never won the world title. 27 non-championship Formula One races. 32 big sports car races, including the Mille Miglia, and 7 TTs at Goodwood. Serious racing driver, never won the World Championship. So there's one. Jim Clark, 66. I think most people that year, finished that year, although Jack Brabham won the championship. Lorenzo Bandini was good in the Ferrari, but I think most people thought Jim Clark was the world's #1 driver, purely because of what he was doing in the 2-litre Lotus 33 against the Brabham 3-litre Brabham Repcos and Ferraris. And I think the same applies, well, many instances through the course of history, to be honest. And certainly for me, I would say Nigel Mansell, for me, deserved to win the 86 World Championship. And I think throughout 87, he was the fastest driver in the world. And I think a lot of people, did a lot of people agree with that? I don't know. But that's how I saw that. And, you know, just deserts that he got the title in 92. So good question. Many examples we can go back to over the years, for sure. It's a long, long answer, though, if we start doing that. Zishan Afsar, Peter, will Lando's inability to capitalise on Piastri's mistakes cost him the World Championship? Were you surprised to see Piastri make so many mistakes this past weekend? I was surprised, yeah, because he's in a McLaren. That's the point, I think, and to not. I think what happened with Oscar is that because of the delays in FP1 and everything, I don't think he was quite in sync with the evolution of the track surface at Baku. You could say, well, a driver of that quality in a car that good should never be an issue, but it clearly is and was for, say, Charles Leclerc as well, and others. There were a lot of shunts there, weren't there? And Alex Albon, you know, just hitting that apex, that was a track surface grip change thing, tyre grip thing. And, you know, it's about letting a street circuit grip evolve, and it's a bit like your rates of input reacting to the dynamic movement of the car. Your rates of input also are related to the evolution of the racetrack, and I think Oscar was out of sync with that, and he was trying too hard at various moments, obviously, and went off. So was I surprised? I suppose one circuit so far where he's looked that bad, and it was a street circuit where he was kind of out of sync with the grip. I was surprised, but I'm prepared to write it off for once. If he does it again in Singapore, it's a different matter, of course. But Lando's inability to capitalise, I think, is a more important point, because he had a good race car. There were no mechanical issues, as far as I know, with that McLaren. And he just failed to deliver. He failed to deliver in qualifying. That was the problem. And it was a sort of very wishy-washy last lap. What was he on there? Norris. He was out on a used set of softs, which is, he started same set of softs. I mean, it wasn't as if he had to change compound feel. He went from medium in Q2 to new softs on the first run, and then the same set on the last run, and just didn't do anything, did he? And that was the problem. You start 8th and you're always going to be in trouble. And I suppose that's where you could say, you know, Lando really failed to capitalise. Once he saw Piastri in the wall, if you were anybody, if you were, you know, Kimi at Ferrari at that moment, or Fernando at Ferrari, and it's Massa in the wall, you immediately jump on that and you just go and get the pole, and you just magnify the advantage you've got over your teammate. And Lando never did that. Now, why was that? I'm still, you know, it's easy enough to say that, and that's obviously an implication that his character maybe isn't fiery enough. But I think it's more to do with technique. I think the problem, as I've said all along, the problem with Lando is that not problem, but the characteristic of Lando is that he is softer with his inputs, by which I mean he does that nice bit with the sofa that Rob Wilson was describing, than Oscar. And Lando's very, very soft and very supple, but he's never ever got his head around shortening the corner and actually making life easier for himself and creating a sweet spot around which he can manage the crosswind and the rain. He's always driving on the edge of, this is as late as I can brake, now I'm going to turn in, now this is the point I can get on the throttle. And if he makes one more small mistake, he sort of backs out of the lap. And I think that's what happened, with all the stuff that was going on, with the track being greasy, the white lines were slippery, the curbs were slippery, all the things that Lando normally can do quite well on a dry track. He was just psyched out by how the car was moving around. And as I say, if Max had been driving that McLaren, he would have been creating a completely different sort of corner, and he would have been dealing with the variables exactly the way he did in the Red Bull. That's my opinion. Obviously, many people would disagree and say, how can you possibly say that? But that's my opinion. The difference between them is, in those situations, with those variables, was absolutely ginormous. And that's why in a way Oscar got caught out by it, and Lando didn't hit anything, but it was almost as bad because he was just slow. And both of them are wide, turn in, brake late, get on the power soon drivers. Oscar even more spiky than Lando. And in the variables of Baku, that really hurt them. Which brings me back to my original point of, why did McLaren want two similar drivers? Daniel Ricciardo is kind of down the middle of, he's a bit George Russell, I was going to say. A little bit earlier than George Russell turn in, a bit softer, I would say, than George. Not as quick on the overall lap these days, or even in the last McLaren year. But he would have been a very good counterpoint to Lando's way of driving. And I think Lando would have benefited more as a driver with Daniel in the car than with Oscar. I've always said that. And equally, and this isn't to say that Oscar's not a brilliant racing driver, he is. If you got Oscar, Daniel would be a better number 2 for him than Lando. Wolf Hunter 777. Hi Peter, wonder if you could talk about the best Irish driver in Formula One, from Watson, Daly, Kennedy, Donnelly. Did you ever see Tommy Byrne? What do you make of Alex Dunn? I think Alex Dunn's brilliant, and I just hope he doesn't end up in Formula E. I hope he, like everybody else, he should be up there, with the Bortolettos and the Colapintos. I think he'd do a really good job in Formula One. Alex Dunn, got a lot of time for him. Having said that, I see my man Leo Fornaroli had another good weekend. Okay, he didn't win either race, but he was there or thereabouts. And he was very quick in the feature race right at the end. Amazing, isn't it? This guy with no Formula One deal, the way he drives. As I say, it's probably because he has no Formula One deal that he's so good. Oh, yeah, should we be saying that? Yes, we can say that. So anyway, getting back to the point, John Watson was incredibly good, front-end driver, not as early turn-in as Alan Prost, but very good feel, very, brave at a time when you had to be brave, driving a Surtees on Firestones in Formula One, understeery car with, just poorly mounted Armco barriers on the side of the circuit. John Watson was always right there. And I think he always underrated himself a bit. I remember when he was at Brabham with Nicky, he was always sort of deferring to Nicky, but quite often he would out-qualify Nicky and be right there and slightly ahead of Nicky. He was phenomenally quick, John Watson. I was always a fan of Watson ever since he drove that private entered old Lotus 48 in the Thruxton Easter Monday Formula 2 meeting. Would have been, 71, I guess. And he was very quick in that. And when I came over to England very briefly at the end of 71, my sister was getting married to an Englishman and their wedding was in the UK, and we came over for like 10 days for the wedding from Australia. And I remember it was the motor racing showboat on the River Thames. It was a massive, great showboat, and inside was a racing car show, racing cars, drivers, everything. And John Watson was there. It was the first autograph I got when I came to England, John Watson. I couldn't believe that he was there. and that was the real John Watson in person. So yeah, I was always a fan. Hopefully I'm a friend to John, and he's been a good friend to me over the years. Did a lap at Goodwood with him once in his 911 and had lots of chats to him about a million different things. Don't always agree with his philosophy, but massive respect for him as a racing driver. When you talk about Irish, I think you're talking about Northern and Southern Ireland, I think, aren't you? So I would say Watson, yes, number one. I notice you don't have Eddie Irvine in that list there, but he'd have to be somewhere there. I wouldn't put him in Watson's class, but not bad. Derek Daly, another driver, a very good friend of mine. His son Connor, of course, doing very well in IndyCar these days. But Derek was above all a laugh, enjoyed his racing life, and was quick. You know, he had his day, and he was certainly capable of more than his results would show. And quite capable of winning a Grand Prix in the right car. Very, very good, Derek Daly. Stood in got the drive at Williams when Carlos sort of retired suddenly after the Brazilian Grand Prix 82. And Derek, I think, underrated, should have achieved more. A lot of respect for him. But in his own Irish sort of way, I remember you'd have conversations with Derek and you'd say, and let's say he's just had a big shunt in the Tyrrell or something, and you'd say, Derek, what happened there? He said, oh, Peter, I'm going to do it. Oh, Peter, you know what? I braked five yards later than I ever had before. I had no control. I just went straight off as if it was a great thing. That was the point. I think a lot of it was the intonation of his accent, but it was all like, yeah, I had this most amazing accident. Oh, brilliant. He didn't say brilliant, but it was like that, talking to him always. Yeah, David Kennedy, very good, very good. Clever, shrewd guy, calmly spoken, softly spoken, quick, a lot of talent, very professional. Again, should have achieved more than he did. Martin Donnelly, yeah, wonderful guy, great car control, great precision as well. Very good in everything he ever did. Still a great guy. I'd put Kennedy, Daly, Donnelly pretty much in the same bracket of quality. All very, very good. All, I would say, not far from Nico Hulkenberg, that sort of thing, quite capable of podiums and never really had the car to justify their talents. Tommy Byrne, yeah, another guy I knew very well. I haven't seen him for a long time, but he lived very near me in London. And we used to play squash together a lot, and he used to give me tapes before the days of downloads of music, and I'd do the same for him. And he was brilliant in Formula 3, absolutely brilliant. Murray Taylor Racing, Ralt, as good as anybody you'd see. I mean, I saw Brundle, Senna, Dumfries, and I'd put Tommy right up there with those guys. I mean, up with Senna, maybe not, but certainly everybody else is just a tad slower. I mean, Calvin Fish, he was at least right there. And Tommy was smooth. He was very, very, it was slightly early on turning. Very similar to Martin Brundle, actually, the way he drove, I thought. Very, very good. And I remember, when he went off to do his McLaren test, which was the reward he had. And it was a semi-wet day, I think, at Silverstone, McLaren M23. I think Tyler Alexander was running a test. And I remember he rang me. I was in a pub for some reason. I don't know why. Never really go to pubs. But I remember I was in a pub somewhere in Surrey, and the phone, it was a mobile phone. I can't remember. Maybe I told him where I was. I don't know. Anyway, I remember talking to him on the phone from a pub, and he'd just done the test. And I said, how did it go? And he said, it was terrible. They never really wanted me in the car. I never felt as if the team wanted me there, and everything I did was wrong. Everything I said was wrong. The whole thing was a waste of time. I remember him saying that, and I was heartbroken because I really thought it would be a big opportunity. Of course, he went on to do quite a lot, and he was but I still think what a great talent Tommy was, and how he deserved to have achieved a lot more than he did. Adam, if they can't get a pedal cam down there, why can't they put a graphic animation? Sorry, just going back to the previous one, I would say John Watson was the best. If they can't get a pedal cam down there, why can't they put a graphic animation on the screen showing what they're doing with the pedals via the telemetry? Well, I suppose they could, but I think this would come back to the Rob Wilson point of we're talking about absolutely tiny increments of throttle and brake, comparing max with, say, Carlos Sainz. The difference between the two, I don't think would show up on the telemetry that they've got if you were just showing the numbers, because it's digital, as Rob says. So, and it would be all happening. Although, as Rob says, speed isn't the thing with footwork. It's all about patience sometimes and being off the pedals. It would still be very complicated to try and look at it numerically, all that, I think. Yes, you could do it as a trace afterwards. But even so, as I say, Rob, I don't think it would differentiate. If the difference between initial brake pedal pressure of Max Verstappen compared with, say, Carlos Sainz is 0.0093, how's that going to show up on telemetry? But it is something as small as that. That's the point. And that's why it's a beautiful thing, because it's something that engineers and data acquisition people can't grab and get hold of and dissect and ruin. It's all something out there that comes under the heading of black magic almost. And Max has got it. And you see it in his body language and in the way he talks. Body language and tone of voice is so important. It's just as important as what they say, is how they say it. That's why you always have this feeling that Yuki Tsunoda's on the edge compared with Max. Zishan Afsar, how different do you think Laurent Mekies operates to Christian Horner in the running of RBL? Tsunoda seems more confident already. Yeah, I think he's doing a very good job, isn't he, Laurent? And he did a very good job at Racing Bulls, and he seems to be very good at spending time with people and understanding people, including racing drivers, and keeping everything calm. Now, I think Christian was as well, until a certain point arrived, and whether it was all to do with Red Bull politics and or other stuff going on behind the scenes, but there was a lot of stuff that built up around Christian that probably made it very difficult to be a Laurent Mekies. You had to have somebody with a clean sheet of paper coming in, getting to know everybody organically, and then getting the best from them, and not pushing too much if that isn't required, and equally pushing a bit more if that is required. It's an art. And running a company, running a team, anyone will tell you it's all about people. It's getting the best from people. Unless you want to destroy a company, of course, and come in and just fire everyone and then sell the company for a vast profit. But we won't go into that one. You know what I think about that. But in general, I think it's all about people. And I think what you're seeing with Laurent is that he's just understanding people, and he's getting the best from them in a very human way. All credit to him. Not easy to do, but I think it's not easy to do, because it's going against the trend of Formula One superstarism of being a team principal in the sort of Flavio Briatore sense of the word. But it's doable, definitely doable, as you said. Speaking of Flavio, I just, I've had a couple of quite unsettling emails from people saying, why are you so hard on Franco Colapinto? And the reason I'm hard on Franco Colapinto is because he doesn't seem to be developing as a driver. The mistakes he made at Baku were identical to the mistakes he's made everywhere else. It's the back end of the car, turning in too wide, getting the power on too soon. You can do that once or twice as a young driver, but if you're doing it basically a year later, you got to think, why isn't he learning from that? But then again, maybe I'm being too harsh, because ultimately it's up to the team principal to be saying to him, what are you doing? Why are you driving so much on the rear of the car? You're the only guy that hit the wall at the back of the car, really. A big crash. Lots of people skimmed the wall, but in terms of actually crashing, everybody else went in front end. They're using the front. You went off with the rear of the car, and that's about how many times have you done that? And I wonder whether that conversation's going on. And I think it's not going on, because they just think, racing drivers, plug him in, young guy, makes mistakes, no problem, he'll be good at the next race, go, give him confidence, blah, 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 and they keep driving the way they drive. And it's such a shame, because as Rob Wilson says, and he's said this many times, any driver with a core of great talent, and all these guys have, including Colapinto, they've all got a lot of talent in their fingertips, in their being. Any driver can then progress in terms of rates of input, softness of touch, subtlety of movement, to the point where they can start to create shorter corners. And even if they don't do that, they can at least drive like Lando Norris and be calm and soft with the car. and create a little bit of a sweet spot that they're not obviously having at the moment because they keep hitting the wall. That is there. It's attainable and doable. And I don't understand why a year later, when you see guys like Bortoleto improving at the rate he is, or Isaac Hadjar, I don't understand why Colapinto isn't. And then there's the other thing, standing in the background, is a guy who was incredibly poorly treated, which is Jack Doohan. I still think very strongly he's been very badly treated, and it's a waste of yet another great talent that we're not seeing in Formula One. And it's all, can it be to do with money with a team with that much sponsorship and ownership? I would like to think not, but if it is, then more fool they, I would say. Al, is it Al? Hi, Peter. Just wondering why you think Red Bull will be good in Singapore, considering the last two circuits were very different. Does it have to do with Red Bull's brake and tyre cooling upgrade? Were they? Do you see Baku very different to Singapore? I don't, actually. I think if you're quick at Baku, why wouldn't you be quick at Singapore? And so that's, maybe I'm completely wrong there. Maybe all the engineers are saying something completely different. But to me, if you're quick at Monza and Baku, you should be quick at Singapore. What's Singapore got that, makes it so difficult and so different? Yeah, it's much harder on brakes. I'll give you that. But I don't think that's going to be a problem for Red Bull. And as for brake and tyre cooling upgrades, yeah, there've been a little bit of, obviously you can change ducting, you can have a certain amount of cooling, but it's all to do with downforce levels. Once you've got a proper downforce level, everything else, whether it be brake cooling, tyre management, engine cooling, all that stuff, fuel consumption, all of that stuff falls into logical place, and you make mods and adjustments in a logical way. If you've got the right amount of downforce and you've got a balance and a grip level that you can play with, that's the key. If you don't have that and you've got a bit of bouncing and your grip level's okay for one lap, then it goes away, and then maybe it's okay on the fifth lap when the tyres get a bit more temperature again once you've done 3 cooling off laps and all that stuff. That's when it becomes complicated when it comes to brake cooling and tyre management, because then it's a hugely complicated thing. What you want is your downforce sorted, relative downforce, efficient downforce, let's call it, downforce versus top speed. Once you've got that, and you've got the tyres working, and you've got everything square and flat, then you can work on all the other stuff. Brake cooling, it's not difficult. Tyre management, tyre temperature, it's not difficult if you've got the car balanced and manageable. So we'll see. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I think Red Bull will be quick at Singapore. Sarosh Soman again. Peter, I think we should do away with the World Championship and focus only on races individually. I think Sterling Moss has said your views, please. I think it would be fantastic to see drivers flat out. Well, yeah, I mean, I actually did say that in my video after the race in Baku. I was going on, Lando, I think, it was a bit of a victim of this whole business of the World Championship points and keeping it between the guardrails and the walls and making sure he finished at all costs and all that stuff. And then I went on to a bit of a spiel about Dennis Jenkinson, the British journalist, who was one of my mentors when I first started as a writer. And Jenks, long before I knew him, but going back to the 50s now, was dead against the World Championship as an entity. He thought it would ruin racing and that drivers would start to drive for points rather than just try to win the Grand Prix, and it would ruin it all. And Grand Prix were big enough in their own right not to need this World Championship points thing to enhance them. The Monaco Grand Prix is the Monaco Grand Prix. The US Grand Prix is the US Grand Prix. A bit like tennis, golf and all the others, the US Open, the Masters, British Open, Wimbledon. All these things are big enough in their own right. The Formula One went the other way, went with the World Championship. And to their credit, they're the only sport in the world which actually has proper big sport, that has a World Championship that begins at the beginning of the year and ends at the end of the year and goes around all these different countries. And that is an amazing thing, an amazing achievement for Formula One to have pulled that together. All credit to Liberty, the FIA, and indeed the previous owners of Formula One, Bernie Ecclestone as well. But is it better in terms of what we saw Lando Norris driving in Baku and what Sterling Moss often did in non-championship races, or Jim Clark? I've just seen a film sent to me by a friend of something I'd never ever seen before. It's a little film about Jim Clark in the '68 Tasman series, And it's a long interview, which I think Rob Luck, who a very good journalist for Sports Car World, did with Jimmy. And Jimmy's talking about the Tasman, the Australian leg of the Tasman in '68. And Jimmy says, what very difficult to do Jim Clark's accent, so I won't do it. Very softly spoken as well. Beautiful voice he had, beautiful accent he had. He said, when we come to the Tasman series, we love the weather, we love the countries, we love the people. In my case, I love flying with Jim Hazelton, learning to fly and then flying. And I love the water skiing and the outdoor life. But believe me, once we get into the cars on Saturday and Sunday, we're racing as hard as we ever race at any stage of the year. And this is the Tasman series. Formula One cars, but with slightly different engines. Bigger engines in the early 60s, smaller in the late by 68, 2.5 rather than 3 litre. But Jimmy's saying we race absolutely flat out. And isn't that a lovely thing to hear? No points involved, basically racing for a trophy, the Tasman Cup, and they all had a nice, enjoyable time. And I think that's the point, isn't it? And you make a good point about Stirling Moss, and we had that picture from Martin Tomlinson earlier, that that lovely rendition he's painted of Stirling in that Cooper. And is it better? We'll never know. And I guess it's not a question that will ever be answered. And I suppose under the heading of commercialization and money and selling on Formula One's rights to another buyer, I think it probably is the right thing to have a world championship, to have points. But in terms of getting the best, a guy like Max would drive every race to win, regardless of whether there were points in the world championship at the end of it or not. And think about this: if there was no world championship and it was just the Baku Grand Prix and the next one's the Singapore Grand Prix, in between he probably would do a couple of races, wouldn't he? It's only because it's the world championship they're all so paranoid about not letting the drivers do anything. We'd see the drivers doing a lot more other stuff. Wouldn't that be good? Louis Sequoia, hi Peter. I saw a documentary about Frank Williams and they talked about his crash and said you were with him in the car, or I misunderstood. Yeah, no, I was indeed in the car with Frank, and it was March '86. We'd been testing at Ricard for 3 days with the new FW11 Honda. And I left with Frank on the Saturday afternoon to go back to England. Frank was doing a half marathon run the next day, and I'd been at Ricard for 3 days with Mobil Oil Corporation, with their French affiliates, guests at the track. Big deal, but I think I was the first guy ever to use test sessions and the factory as ways of entertaining sponsors, affiliates and clients, as distinct from just doing it at a race meeting. So we were breaking new ground there, and I had a lot of Mobil people at Ricard, and that sort of finished on Friday night, and I was there Saturday morning, and Nelson and Nigel were testing. And we drove off, and Frank was in a Avis rented Ford Mondeo, one of the early Ford Mondeos with the very rounded windscreen pillar, aerodynamically shaped. Anyway, we had the accident, rolled over, came down upside down on Frank's side. He was driving, and the windscreen pillar just basically collapsed, and he took a full blow, vertical blow on his head, which basically pushed the fourth and fifth vertebra apart like that and pinched the the spinal cord. And we were upside down, there was fuel leaking, and we were wearing seatbelts, had to get all that stuff undone, upside down, the roof had caved in, and there was a smell of fuel, and all Frank was saying correctly was, get me out, I can't move. And so I had to pull him out. I was very aware that he couldn't move his legs at that point. I remember him saying, I'm trapped, but he didn't look to be trapped. He said, I can't move my legs. So I got under his armpits and tried to rest his head on my chest to pull him out backwards from the car, and try not to move him as more than I should have or could have. But I wanted to get him out because of the potential of fire, and the back window was sort of jaggedly broken. I managed to drag him through that. But actually, interesting point, then I saw a foot, actually quite a big boot, like a Timberland boot, just smashing away the rest of the glass around the rear window to give me a bigger space to pull him out, which I then did. And it was a guy, and I just, in broken French, I said, big accident, go get on the phone, whatever you can do, go back to Circuit Paul Ricard, ask for Nelson Piquet, because I knew Nelson had his road going Merc there with a car phone, big deal at the time. And we needed that car phone to let everybody know, but also to ring for an ambulance. This guy went straight off and did that. And that guy turned out to be Cora Reutemann's, in other words, the eldest daughter of Carlos Reutemann's, Cora Reutemann's mathematics teacher at a school in Monaco. Can you believe that? I never got to see him or meet him or say thank you to him, but he did that. And then, and I was there with Frank, I guess about 50 minutes in the field there in France with Frank, cradling Frank really. And he had a big blow on his head, a lot of blood. And he was conscious and was talking about, he knew it was going to be a long haul and he potentially wasn't going to make it. He was talking about, he was a Catholic and would want the last rites, and all the contracts were signed for 86, most of them for 87, and get Patrick to do this, Sheridan to do that, and various things going on. And then eventually this rickety old de Chevaux corrugated iron type ambulance arrived from Toulon, and Frank was carried into that. And when he eventually got to Toulon Hospital, after about an hour, they said, "Oh, these injuries are too bad. He needs to go to Marseille Hospital, where they have much more equipment to do. He needs to go into traction and all the rest of it." So that by then, Nelson and Nigel had arrived, and Frank Durney and a few others. And Nigel was delegated to go in the ambulance. It was a big Citroën ambulance. This one, much better. Big one, but like a Citroën SM version of an ambulance. And Nigel got in with Frank and was sort of there telling him jokes throughout the trip, trying to keep him alive and buoyant, conscious anyway. And Nelson and I and Frank Durney followed in Nelson's Merc to Marseille. Anyway, long story, but I was there, and it was obviously changed my life, and spent the next 6 months really not going to races, but indeed spending a lot of time with Frank at the hospital, recuperation, just being there with him and being his right hand in terms of things he wanted done with the company and people and stuff like that, and just managing it all obviously with Ginny, his wife, who was absolutely brilliant throughout. And as a result of which I became very close friends with Ginny as well. I didn't really know her before that, but she was absolutely so intelligent, such a bright lady, just brilliant. Anyway, there we go. Spitfire, that's a good name. Peter, what's the chance of... Why hasn't that come through? It's a bit of a delay, a bit like throttle lag on a turbo here. There, it's coming through. Spitfire, Peter, what's the chance of team orders at McLaren to secure the World Drivers' Championship for Piastri? Relationship breakdown, Lando leaves, Lawson joins, Kiwi back at McLaren with an Aussie, but Brit Formula One reached maximum outrage. Is that what you want? You want Brit Formula One to reach maximum outrage? What does Brit Formula One mean anyway? Does that include me? Hope not. I don't think they'll apply team orders to let Oscar win it in favour of Lando, unless Lando's no longer in it and Max has caught him. And going into the last two races, only Oscar can win it, and they've got to beat Max. I think then Lando would obey team orders and do that, wouldn't he? That's the only circumstance, I think. Up until the point when when one of them no longer has a chance to win, they will not apply team orders. As I say, stand back and wait for Zach's master plan, how he's going to handle that. He's probably going to think, well, if they crash into one another, it's good for TV, good for us. We're still going to win the Constructors' Championship. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know what he thinks. But anyway, what you want, though, is you want the Kiwi back at McLaren. You want Bruce, Chris Amon, Howden Ganley, Denny Hulme, and now you want Liam Lawson there. Well, wouldn't that be good? Yep, very good. He might well get it. I mean, he's driving better and better, Liam, isn't he? I think a little bit like Carlos Sainz when he was so oversteery and wide turn in the Toro Rosso days, Red Bull days, whatever. I think he eventually found that sweet spot at Ferrari when he just toned back a little bit on what he was doing, and to the point he could start repeating it all. And I think Liam found that little spot in Baku. He's always been mega car control, very, very quick, Liam Lawson. But he's always been back end, late turn in, late braking, to the point where you make a mistake or the grip goes away. He just he comes back a little bit. Whereas I know Hadjar didn't have a good weekend in Baku, but in general, Hadjar is going to have a bigger sweet spot to manage stuff like that in general. So, wow, lots of questions. I'm not going to be able to get through all these, I don't think. Adam says, again, time delay, but anyway, interesting to note that since Horner left, Max and Laurent are both sharing that next year will indeed be a big challenge. Diplomatic way of saying they know there won't be a serious contender for wins. Well, why not play it down? What's the point of saying, oh yeah, we're going to be right up there? I've never understood that really. Even with boxing, yeah, I'm going to win. It's always better to do the other thing because you can always come from behind, can't you? I personally I think they're overrating the opposition. How do they know? Nobody knows. I don't know. You don't know. Nobody has a clue. All I can tell you is that Phil Prue is no idiot. He's pretty good, and he's running the power unit division, and Max is no idiot as a racing driver. And I think they've all got their ability more or less pointing in the right direction now in terms of where they're going with the car. So, yeah, is it really going to be that bad? I don't believe so. Anyway, we'll see. Peter, why isn't there readily available pedal cam footage so we can see drivers' footwork? Well, whenever I ask the question, they always say because it needs a sufficient amount of lighting, and it's the size of the lighting that is the problem. All the teams want to have a smaller footwell area as possible for aerodynamic whatever reasons, and there's no way they can persuade the teams to run lights or to build a footwell area big enough to take the lighting they need. And I've said, well, the answer to that surely is to build it into the Concord Agreement and the sporting regulations or the technical regulations defining the size of the footwell area, a bit like the cockpit dimensions are defined around a templated Grand Prix driver who's sort of Alex Wurtz's size or Esteban Ocon. Then why aren't we doing the same around the footwell area? Oh, well, yeah, difficult. So it never happens. But they should. In my opinion, they're missing a trick big time, but they won't do it because they've not done it for so long that they won't change it now. A bit like speed bumps. Nicholas, legend still says that Lando's still driving around like an old woman. Oh, well. Is legend another person or is legend the legend of Lando Norris? He's not all the time like an old woman. Come on, just with a bit of crosswind and a bit greasy he is, a bit circumspect. But but if there's maximum grip at Singapore, you set a soft, clear lap, he'll be quick. Don't worry. Adam, this is why Max is competing in GT3 24 hours next year. He knows he needs something else to keep him motivated. Well, yeah, exactly. But even if he's not that quick, if the car's not that quick. Let me rephrase that. Even if the car's really quick, I think he'll do it anyway because he knows it's a good thing to do as a racing driver. Much more healthy than, dare I say it, going to movie premieres or fashion shows, or even just going to the gym every day, or riding bikes up and down the mountains at Monaco. Driving a race car around Monaco, around Nürburgring, mega. Anonymous, wow, that's dodgy. Anonymous, hey Peter, rank Max Lewis, Schumacher, Senna. Well, I'd say Max Lewis and Schumi at various moments of their careers, very, very similar. All short corner drivers, all brilliant in terms of rates of input. I don't think that applies to Lewis now. I don't think it applied to Michael in the Mercedes years, but it still certainly applies to Max now. But if you take the best from Schumacher and Hamilton, not far away from Max, very similar. And then Senna was definitely not a short corner driver. He was wider turn in, but he was perfection at that. I don't think we've had a driver better at a later turn in than Ayrton Senna. And if you want to look at the way Ayrton Senna drove, look at George Russell. Now, George isn't Ayrton, and he's not, I don't know. I mean, to me, he's really, really quick. But Ayrton was probably more precise in a couple of areas. Probably. And anyway, they're driving different cars. Ayrton always drove, or pretty much drove with manual shift for most of his career, whereas George has only ever driven a two-pedal car. So a lot of that needs to be taken into account. But if you want to see the lines that Senna took and the sort of precision that Senna had. Look no further than George Russell today to get a feel for what he was like as a driver. And so rating them, I would rate Max still ahead of those four. I think, as I said, at Baku, I think he's edged a little bit further ahead from Lewis again. And I think, I always think a great short corner driver is always going to be slightly ahead of a great longer corner driver. And I was never a fan, any more than he himself was, of the throttle blipping that Senna had when he was finding the moment to load up the rear. And I say that because I remember talking to him about that in Formula 3, and he was saying, yeah, it's a habit I've had ever since karting, and I need to try to get over it. But he never did, because it actually worked quite well for him in the turbo lag days of Formula 1. And it kind of gave him a nice way of getting the power at exactly the right moment when there was throttle lag on the Honda engine. And the Honda people loved it. And so he never got away from that. But in a normally aspirated car, I don't think it was precise as the way Max uses the throttle. And I don't think Etten would ever have changed. I think he was always like that. This is P1 Astri. I think it means Piastri. Hi, Peter. Well, it's gone away. Sorry, why is that? First world problem here, but I'd love to see the iconic colours of Nigel's FW14B permanently back on the Williams one day. Currently find the car a little bland. Cheers, mate. Well, I totally agree with you. I don't know what they're thinking with the look of that team and the logo they've got. Why change anything? If they want to be Williams and they've bought all the Williams assets, why not buy the heritage as well? I know they have bought the heritage. Why not buy Williams as it was? I mean, what I would have done if I was Doralton, I think that's what they are, is it? I would have gone back to the original Frank Williams Racing Cars logo, which is a really nice sort of arrow, and it said Frank Williams on. I would have had that on the side, and I would have made the blue a dark blue as Frank had it, like the Piers Courage cars in '69. Absolutely gorgeous. Why, if they want to go to blue, why not do that? It didn't make any sense to me. What's the blue they've got? Totally agree with you. And I've got to say thank you for the comments you make about the 14B, because the first job I was given when I arrived at Williams at the beginning of '85 was to relivery the Formula One car. In '84, it was Frank green and white with the Saudi and a few other Mobil were on it, I think. And yeah, we had some ICI as well, yellow. And Frank said, no, we've got to do a much better job with that. Go away. And I came up. I did actually work with Peter Stevens a bit. I picked his brains anyway. And I think Peter Stevens did come up with the ideas. We sat down for a while. Lovely guy. And we came up with the blue diagonal Mobil stripe, the red and white cannon, and the yellow at the top. And that then lasted all the way through to the Rothmans days. And I loved that combination. And I did a lot of the graphics for and the design of the shirts, which Patrick hated. Initial ones anyway. Couldn't stand them. I feel like a clown wearing these. And so, but yeah, there were great moments when you could do those sorts of things. And we got all the sponsors in. And I remember Mobil, it's not untypical of any sponsor, but Mobil, they have that Pegasus, the horse, they call it a Pegasus. The angle of the Pegasus had to be absolutely perfect within half a degree every time. And then we had to accommodate Honda, which is not easy because Frank would always oversell Honda's space, and then we had to try and make them happy and give them less space than they thought they were entitled to. Super chat here from M.A. Khan. Thank you very much, M.A. Khan. I've clicked on it. Hope it appears. It's very slow reflexes on this question box thing today. Why is that? Anyway, I'm going to read out M.A. Khan's super chat, but thank you for it, mate. Peter, do you agree with Max that he can practice his driving in any type of car? Lewis had said at Formula 1 level, you can only practice in an F1 car. Totally agree with Max. I can't believe Lewis said that, but it's only because he's never done a day with Rob in a Ford Puma. And then he would totally disagree with what he's just said. And anyway, what would Lewis think, or what does Lewis think, because I presume he knows this, that after 3 days with Rob, Bruno Senna said, my uncle would have loved these days, i.e. Etten. What does Lewis think about that? Because it's the first time you can really touch and feel the art of driving. I know we're just in a road car, and in those days it was like an Opel Kadett or something. I don't know what it was, but it's always manual transmission. Ayrton would have absolutely loved this, said Bruno. And there you go, it's come up. Talk about slow reflexes. And Max is absolutely right. In the same way, Rob's absolutely correct in saying you don't need anything more than a manual transmission Ford Puma, front-wheel drive, to be able to get all the lumps out of your driving, to get your rates of input commensurate with that car, which is not easy to do at all. But if you can do that, you can then project it to obviously something much quicker. Weight transfer still exists, whether you're in a Formula One car or a road car. It just happens at a different rate and a different way, but it's still there. Just because a Formula One car is stiff and low doesn't mean to say it doesn't have weight transfer. Of course it does. And it's all about managing that. And anybody that doesn't understand that hasn't spent enough time thinking about it, I'm afraid. And I don't in any way want to criticize Lewis, but I can't believe he actually said that. This doesn't make sense to me at all. Adam, how are Mercedes going to beat McLaren next year when McLaren seemingly have a better aero team? Why would Max go there, given the results the past 4 years? Well, for a start, I don't think Max is going there. He might in the future, but I don't think he is. He's going to stay at Red Bull. And secondly, you've got to assume that, I mean, it's not only the power units that are changing. Quite a lot's changing on the car. So in a way, Mercedes have got a bit of a clean sheet of paper built based on a lot of building blocks around which to build a half-decent car. So I don't think it's a given that McLaren will have a better car than Mercedes next year. They probably will, because they're doing so well with all the information they have, which can take them to the next level. But equally, Mercedes weren't that bad around Baku, and they've had some good days, haven't they? They've had some good races. So I would say, my gut feeling is that Red Bull Ford will be better than people think. Mercedes will be better than people think. Ferrari will be about where they are now and might win a race or two. But I don't think McLaren will dominate next year. That's my gut feeling. I think they'll have a good car and they'll win races, but I don't think they'll have the car they had this year in terms of their advantage. Krishish. Good morning, Peter. Morning to you. It's actually afternoon now. About another half hour, guys, I think, on this one. I was very impressed with George Russell at the weekend, battling through Flue to finish P2. How hard is it to drive whilst not being in peak condition? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the adrenaline obviously takes over, and then you feel it. That's why he looked so debilitated when he got out of the car, because then you relax. The race is over, you relax, and then the adrenaline's no longer pumping, and you're feeling all the things that you are and the condition you're in, but worse, obviously. So brilliant drive by George, I thought. Just trying to think. I mean, there was it Morocco 57 when everybody got food poisoning, and Sterling, I may be wrong here, but I think Sterling got a hard time for not racing from the British press, actually, and not being a tough guy and going out there racing with dysentery. And I think he proved them correct, that it was not a clever thing to do. Yeah, we've had, a lot of drivers have gone through. A lot of drivers, well, have they? I'm just trying to think. How many drivers have driven the race that George drove feeling the way he did? I think obviously there have been a few. I don't remember that many. I remember James Hunt throwing up a few times, but that's more just a normal thing from James, either related on what happened the night before, stroke nervousness. Just trying to think, really. It's not that often, not that common that happens, and good luck to him that he did that. Very much so. That was a gritty drive. That was the sort of counterpoint to Lando Norris at Baku, wasn't it? Spitfire, he's talking to Piastri. James Voles cracking open and smoking a pack of Camels on the pit wall would be a huge vibe. STZ02, hey Peter, it seems to me Max loves driving racing more than anyone else. Do you think that's what makes the difference? How does he, in your opinion, compare to other greats in their love of the racing? Well, I think we've been talking a little bit about that a couple of questions ago, which was that Max is clever enough to know that every time he's driving a car, whether it be a road car, a GT3 car, whatever, it's helping his driving. He's probably going to learn something, and it'll all benefit him as a racing driver. And I think not many racing drivers today think that way. They may start thinking that way as a result of Max Verstappen, but up until this point, it's always been, we're Formula One drivers, we've got nothing to learn, we'll go to the simulator and the gym are everything, and I've got my trainer and my nutritionist and my sports psychologist, that's all I need. And staring them in the face is a manual transmission road car that actually, if they perfected their heel and towing and they absolutely lump-free braking everywhere, looking for bumps in the road to make sure they've just got everything as smooth as possible, that would actually be improving them as a Grand Prix driver. But they don't think that way because it's too banal. It's too, it's not cool enough. And I remember, I better not mention his name, but I remember being with Rob at a Rob Day once, and a Grand Prix driver, a winning Grand Prix driver at the time, was doing a few days with Rob and loved it, but then blew it completely by saying, "Oh yeah, but these road cars are boring, aren't they? I've got a mate with an M3. I'll bring that up next time." And Rob said, "No, we don't need an M3. For a start, it'll probably blow up or do something, and secondly, it'll actually cover some of the things that are showing up in this sloppy road car. Don't do that." Anyway, he turned up with the M3. Sure enough, the transmission blew after about half an hour. And equally, they didn't learn anything. Complete waste of time. And that's where Lewis is completely wrong in saying that you've got to have a race car. You don't. You just need a road car in very, very quiet conditions where you can talk to one another inside the cockpit, on road tyres, a little bit more air in the tyres, obviously. You need a cone track with lots of runoff area, and you need somebody next to you who knows what he's doing. And I guarantee, if Lewis to sit next to Rob, well, put it another way, if Lewis to sit next to Rob and Rob was driving and there was a cone lap of 1 minute and Rob did a 1:45.3, I would be absolutely astonished if Lewis could jump then into the driver's seat and get under 1:45. I don't believe he would. He might within about 10 laps, but he wouldn't just do it instantly, which you would imagine a 7 times world champion Lewis Hamilton would. This isn't, Rob's past middle age, smokes a little bit, cappuccino in his hand most of the time, and not the fittest guy in the world. Lewis should be 3 seconds a lap quicker than him, but he wouldn't be. And that's because Rob still perfectly manages the rates of input and what he's doing with the car. And I think Lewis very quickly would realize that and think, well, that's interesting that a guy like that can be that quick. What's he doing? And then he would start to think. And then he would start to say, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. And he's so good, Lewis, that he would pick it up very, very quickly. And it'd be fascinating to see that process. But because Lewis doesn't think he could ever benefit from somebody like Rob, A and B, doesn't think that road cars could possibly be the right vehicle in which to do that, it'll never happen, which is a great shame. Another super chat here. This is from Alex saying, Peter, absolutely love your content. Thank you very much, Alex. I guess there's going to be a time delay on this one as well. And thank you for it. Question, is Oscar Piastri only as good as the McLaren, or is he good enough to prove himself exceptional in other makes of car like Max? No, I think he's the latter. And I've often said, and I was quite outspoken, to the point where it's kind of ruined my friendship with Mark Webber, I must say. I was quite outspoken about the way he didn't stick with, sorry this super chat's not coming up, it's from Alex, didn't stick with the Alpine deal that he had, even if the contract was a bit wishy-washy, which it obviously was because the contractual people said it wasn't valid. But Alpine had got to the point of running him on the sim a lot and declaring him to be the race driver. He was the race driver. And I said, being of the vintage that I am, I can remember Jackie Stewart driving for Ken Tyrrell with no signed contract at all, just a handshake. And I just couldn't believe he'd done that. And my point was, of course, McLaren was a much better team than Alpine were ever going to be. And there's no doubt that if there was one option, one or the other, you'd go to McLaren. It's absolutely, no decision to be made. But my point was that if he'd stayed at Alpine, where would he be now? He'd probably be in the Antonelli car, wouldn't he? He'd be at Mercedes alongside George. And I think he'd be really, really good. He might have gone to Ferrari. Who knows? He might have replaced Sainz. I think he would have been really good. I think he would very quickly have shown how good he is. And I think he would have had other options straight away. Now, he's in McLaren. That's fine. You can't take it away. But in answer to your question, I think he's very good. And I think he'd look great in any car, in a Mercedes or a Ferrari or a Red Bull. Cool. Peter, are we watching Max this weekend? How do you think he's going to perform? It's at the Nürburgring, this, isn't it? How do you watch it? Can you watch it? I suppose so. I'll try and look. Yeah, absolutely. If he's there. The only thing is, it's a funny sort of race, isn't it? He's in a specific class where I suppose all the TV cameras will be on Max, won't they? So that'll be good. Yeah, if I can, I'd love to see him. I don't know what's going on with this thing. It's not refreshing. It's not working very well, this chat box today. Nothing to do with the internet. I've got really good internet here at the moment, it tells me. I just like to see your... Oh, what question was that? Okay, that was... Anyway. Spitfire says, how good was Lawson? First time in an F1 car at Baku with an almost perfect weekend, no mistakes, bar one elegant and harmless practice spin and putting a V-carb third in qualifying. Yeah, very, very good. As I say, I've been quite critical of Liam because he's very much a wide entry, late braking expert with great car control. And I've been explaining that's why, in general, when the car's not brilliant, Hadjar's always been quicker. But when the car's quite good and he's actually driving as well as he is in that genre of late braking, wide turn in, and he's found a little bit of a sweet spot, come back a little bit from where he was when he really wants to be quick, and he can repeat it, which I think he's done, a bit like Carlos Sainz did at Ferrari, then yeah, good. That's where he's going to go now, and that's how he drives, and it's very, very good. And the car's obviously half reasonable as well. And he went out, and because those rabbits go out at the beginning of Q3, because the track's not at its quickest then. That's when the B-carbs and the Williams and stuff go out. And guess what? That's when the track was at its quickest, and that's why we saw them there. And don't underplay how good Lawson was on the last lap he drove. He was much quicker than Carlos Sainz, who didn't go any quicker on that last lap. And there's Liam on the same set of softs going, very quick. And Max going very quickly too. So very good. In terms of what happened in the last minute of qualifying, he should really have been on the front row. And he drove very well in the race, very well. And by his own admission, Hadjar, interestingly, by his own admission, he does seem to admit a lot of mistakes, a bit like Charles Leclerc. And what about Leclerc congratulating Max after his pole lap as well? Wasn't that nice? And then equally, what about Hadjar admitting the mistakes he made, hitting curbs and stuff and bouncing all over the place, which all race drivers do, He's quite young. If Max will drive in the NLS this Saturday, there will again be light rain, so perfect for him. Yeah, well, absolutely. I hate to be the guy that says, oh yeah, I remember the days, but remember that 62, well you wouldn't, but 62 Nürburgring 1,000 kilometers. Jim Clark did that race, between Grand Prix, and he was debuting the new little Lotus 23 with the 1500cc Ford twin cam engine in the back against the big 5-litre Ferraris and Aston Martins and everything else. And it was drizzle, and he blew the opposition away. He was leading by about 3 minutes at the end of the first lap. Eventually an exhaust manifold came loose, and he started to get nauseated by the exhaust gas, and actually had an off as a result. But yeah, show light rain to Max Verstappen or Jim Clark around the Nürburgring, and you won't see them for the spray. Another super chat here, going up to the top. This is from, it just says super chat, no question, but thank you very much. Very kind, from Jeffrey B. Hopefully it'll come up. I don't know. I think whenever I try and click on a super chat now, it kind of messes up my normal chat. But don't stop doing the super chats. I love them. It's very kind. It's my son Jack's birthday coming up, so I need a little bit of money to buy him a golf ball or something like that. Actually, can I say, yeah, Cameron has been very, very sweet and very kindly sent Jack a bit of money on an Amazon account, and Jack's already bought it. I can't believe what he's bought. He's bought the complete set of those Japanese books on the whole Japanese supercar's the wrong word, the whole Japanese drifting car ethos. He absolutely loves it when he's not playing golf. Had a great tournament at the weekend. Rob, but I could understand when he skips it in the current circumstances around title chances. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously if he's travelling, and don't forget, as the championship gets tighter, if he continues to go well, Max is going to be in all different parts of the world, so it's going to make it very difficult to keep coming back to Europe to race. But if he's in basically Europe for a month or so, why not? What's the problem? Much better for him to do that than to go to the gym or cycling or, you know, all the other stuff they do, the boring old simulator. Milton Keynes, you know, go and drive around the Nürburgring. Of course that's going to be good for you. Adam, did you see lower lap times video claiming Max's car was changing its brake bias automatically in between corners 5 at 6 at Baku? Is this legal? I didn't. And I don't think it is legal, no, but I think if it's automatically, it's done from the garage, so it wouldn't be legal. But I don't think if it was, if that's what was happening and it is illegal, I don't think it was happening. That's what I'm saying. You know, very easy to see that. But I mean, how do you know he's not doing it in a way we can't see on the onboard? What are we talking about? Did you see lower lap times video claiming Max's car? I don't know. We'll have to see. I didn't see it. I can't comment on that really. I doubt it very much is all I'm saying. Lewis complained about the softs leading into Q2. Yeah, well, yeah. I think everybody was in two minds because the medium looked to be a good tyre in terms of, you know, giving you an extra lap or two and not being far away from the soft. But I can understand the Ferrari. I guess the Ferrari philosophy was we want to give Lewis as much grip as we can give him, and he's quick here and he can handle it. He can get the lap in. I guess that's what they were thinking, maximize his opportunity. Well, you know, I think that whole business of medium soft, I think it's very difficult for the driver to criticize the team or the team to criticize the driver, because there were good examples of both choices being correct in qualifying and in the race. Not in the race, really. I mean, the way to run the race was hard medium, obviously, but in qualifying, it was difficult. You know, Max got the pole on the softs, but he really wanted to be on the medium, but he still got the pole. You know. Zishan Afsar. If Isaac Hadjar gets promoted, what do you think he needs to do in order to avoid the fate of Max's other teammates? Well, if he does as well as Sergio Perez, he'd be doing pretty well, wouldn't he? He'd be winning Grand Prix, or Daniel Ricciardo. So there's that. What you're talking about in more recent history, I suppose, is Liam and Yuki. And I don't think he will fall into that category because he's a short corner driver. Very similar in the way he he gets into the car and uses the steering, the pedal and the brakes. He's very similar to Max. Obviously not Max's level. So I think he'll do pretty well. And if the car is a winning car, I think by law of averages, as it was with Perez, I think he'll win a Grand Prix or two. If Max is winning 6 Grand Prix in a year, if the car's that good, then Hadjar and the other cars should win a race. I would have thought race or two by law of averages. I think he's that good. So I don't think, but you know, Lawson was a different thing. The car was really difficult when Lawson was there, and he was just applying his Liam Lawson way of driving, which was just the worst thing you could do with the car that was that bad, with that grip level and that inconsistency, because he was never able to get on top of the car. It's a better car now. If Lawson was in the Red Bull now, he'd do a much better job. And it's not because he's just gone well in Baku, but because he's found a sweet spot more of how to drive that car, which Yuki Tsunoda does. And Yuki's a sort of slightly detuned version of Liam Lawson in that sense. So it's not a question of avoiding. I think he would relish the opportunity, and I think he'd do very well in alongside Max, because he's also bright enough to know that he's Max's wingman, and he's not there to try and be Isaac Hadjar superstar. Maybe that day will come when Max leaves Red Bull, but he knows at the moment his job, if he goes there, will be to be his wingman. And that, you've got to be reasonably self-confident to do that. I think if you go there thinking, I want to make sure I get the same treatment that I got at Racing Bulls, that's actually a sign of insecurity. A sign of security is knowing that you're Max's wingman, and I think he'll do that. Spitfire. I was surprised when I drove a right-hand drive manual on the road, and it wasn't an issue at all. The muscle memory somehow just transferred over somehow, and I could shift with my right hand just as well. Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, left or right hand shifters. Well, he means left-hand drive, he said, but anyway. Yeah, I mean, personally, I've never had an issue. I've never known a Grand Prix driver jump from a right to a left, ever had an issue. The only issue Rob has is with young guys that do days with him but have never used a clutch in their life. It behoves all fathers of young racing drivers to make sure they've got at least one road car with a manual transmission. And the reason Rob likes manual transmissions is because it's very, very good training for bump-free driving, for seamless driving, for everything happening harmoniously in the Ayrton Senna way, and how much he loved the art of changing gear. And that, for Rob, that's part of the package. And he's right. If you show Max a manual transmission, for sure he'll be absolutely perfect within one gear change. Rob, probably it's easier for a right-handed person to move from shifter to the left to shifter to the right than the other way around. I think it'd be difficult for me to shift with the left hand. All I can say is I'm left-handed, and I've never had a problem driving a left or right-handed drive manual car. Both of them completely normal. It's an interesting point though, isn't it? They say now that the best possible security system you can have in the United States is a manual transmission car. No matter what you got, nobody can drive them. Well, one or two can. That's why a Hyundai i20N would be such a great car to park in a really upmarket part of Miami and just watch the people come and try and nick it. Oh, how do we make this work? What's this third pedal here? Aximus Rose says, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. What's he talking about there? Probably Lando Norris in Baku? I don't know. Aya Aurora. Hi, Peter. What does Red Bull need to excel in Singapore, given they don't usually generate as much efficient downforce as the McLarens? Well, I think they just about do now. I think we saw that in Baku, and we saw that in Monza. They got much more speed now, and they are a quicker car than they were. They're nearer McLaren now. I don't think McLaren have got any quicker, and I think Red Bull have closed the gap to McLaren. I'm not saying their car is as good as a McLaren, which speaks volumes of Max's work in Baku and Monza. And I'm not saying it will be there with a McLaren at Singapore, but I think it'll be near enough for Max to be able to make the difference he can usually make as a racing driver over the Grand Prix weekend, and how he puts the 3 days together working with Jim Piero and the boys. Stuart Campbell. Good morning, Peter. Absolute pleasure listening in. Thank you very much, Stuart. Very kind. Good morning to you. For the knowledge, the talk, and the stories, you kind of stand alone. So thank you very much. Very kind. I'm sure I don't. Many more out there, but better than I. But thank you very much. I just try to, I just love talking about. I love it when you, the viewer, reader, whatever, listener, says something and it triggers a memory of something that I was lucky enough to have been a part of or seen. Big Al. Hi, Peter. I saw you on YouTube. Max's steering wheel. I saw on YouTube Max's steering wheel was being analysed during the Baku Grand Prix. At certain times there were displays appearing without input from Max. Yeah, well, people are talking about that. Let's see if there's any more coming from that. As I say, that is such a blatant, if that is happening and they're actually adjusting the settings from the garage, that is such a blatant breach of the regulations. to warrant probably disqualification for the World Championship. So I very much doubt they're doing that, is what I'm getting around to saying. Rothis TS. Hi Peter. People are fussing more with Merc engines. Do you think Red Bull, Ford undergoing themselves? Recently I saw both Red Bull and Ford are marking more. Ever seen any first-time manufacturer successful? I think what you're saying there is that people are talking about how good the Merc will be, and then they're underplaying the Ford, or not rating the Ford Red Bull powertrain engine, and it probably will be better than people think. And I agree with you if that's the case. And if you were at Red Bull at the moment, you wouldn't be out there saying, no, we've got a really good power unit, stand back everybody. You wouldn't be saying that, would you? You'd be, if you're normal people going racing, you're very, very circumspect about what you say about a completely new power unit. Ever seen any first-time manufacturer successful? Well, Ford with the Cosworth DFV weren't bad. They won the first Grand Prix. Brand new engine designed by Keith Duckworth and Mike Costin, Cosworth, and it won the Dutch Grand Prix 67. Very little testing. Did a lot on the bench, admittedly. It did one run at Hethel and Snetterton, 2 circuits that Graham Hill drove, and then they turned up at Zandvoort. From memory, Graham was on the pole and Jimmy won the race. So what more do you want? Pretty good engine. And of course, there have been other examples as well. But, wow, that was the all-time great one. Review. Wasn't Max braking much later than Piastri in turn 15 and then locked up due to not having contact with the surface long enough? Not quite sure what you mean by that. You mean Piastri locked up due to not having contact with the surface long enough? We're talking about the race, are we? Not sure. Anyway, for me in the race, Piastri's mistake wasn't, it was part of it was being put on the new mediums by McLaren. I think they should have split their options at least. They had 2 cars in the midfield, and pretty clearly the hard medium was the right way to drive that race, in that you could extend the first stint as long as possible, especially if the car was as good as a McLaren, and then benefit from the medians the back end of the race when the traffic was going to be less and the track grip, maybe a bit of debris and stuff like that. And they didn't. They put both cars on new mediums, which put the onus on the drivers having to maximize that choice by passing cars off the line and doing well in the early laps. And Piastri on that first, having blown the start, nonetheless, he passed 2 cars before he got alongside Ocon. And he was around the outside of Ocon where there was not a lot of grip and just locked up. It was so little. If he hadn't been if he'd been on a new set of hards, would he have done that? Would he have been around the outside of Ocon? Not so sure. Kudos, this is from Rufus. Kudos to George for putting in a great drive. Tough weekend for him. It was great drive. Tenny K. Peter, Lando mentioned during Baku qualifying that he didn't have the delta on his final lap. Do you think that's the right approach? Yeah, I think, he stopped much too, he ran out of time much too early. And the track was definitely quicker when he was pulling into the Parc Fermé almost. So again, that has to be a little bit of a McLaren drama. But in a way, you can't... there were so many variables. It's very easy to be a Monday morning quarterback there. McLaren may well have felt that the track was very quick as it opened and there was more rain coming. Who knew? Who knows? And that could have been the way to do it. As it happened, it wasn't. But there was a lot going on. The wind was swirling, and he didn't. He's on his used softs, and he just didn't get a lap in, did he? AB, it's almost going to have to be the last question. Peter, would surely love to know whom do you prefer more, Roger, Rafa, or Djokovic? I'm sure you prefer Sampras and Boris Becker more. Still choose, by the way, these. Have you watched them? I think I've seen all of them play, yeah. Not a massive Boris Becker fan. I remember watching Becker win Queens before he won his first Wimbledon. I was with Ross Cheever, and neither of us were fans then, and I don't think we've remained fans ever. That's just Boris, you just weren't into it. But Pete Sampras, yeah, love watching Pete. We saw him playing quite a lot of tournaments, not only Wimbledon, but just so cool and such a great guy. Sort of forerunner of Roger Federer, really, wasn't he? A similar approach, just a good man and a good player. Rafa too, yeah, massive fan of Rafa. I was a massive fan, I got to say here, best wishes to Bjorn Borg. I know he's not well and he's fighting cancer, but huge fan of Bjorn and wish him all the well, all we can, all the blessings we can. But yeah, to me, Rafa's a sort of modern version of Bjorn Borg. And Novak, I got to meet Novak actually at an event in the O2 Arena thing, and I was lucky enough to be with a sponsors group there, and he came up and we chatted for a while. I was very impressed with him, just thought he was completely normal, down to earth, good guy. Not massively a fan of the way he handled the whole vaccination thing, COVID era, but as a player, yeah, beautifully neat and compact and precise to watch, and just getting, he's just getting beaten by age now, isn't he, more than anything else. So yeah, and we often see young Alcaraz down here at the golf course here, lives very nearby, and he's out there uses a buggy, but he's a good golfer, seriously good golfer. It'd be an interesting match between him and, say, Andy Murray in terms of golf, very similar. And Lando Norris, actually, quite impressed with his golf swing. Comes across the ball a bit at impact, I noticed. A little bit like the way he drives. It's almost there. He's got the lovely timing and rhythm. He's got that soft touch. But when it actually comes to impact, in other words, short corners, he kind of makes it go a bit too long across the ball, not getting quite enough body movement through impact. But good, good timing. Looked good on that par 3 thing he did at Wentworth. Pistol Pete was a gun. Yeah, he was indeed. He was brilliant. Michael Cruz says, hi, Peter. Rob says, but now I think Lando has less chance of winning the championship than Max, both below Oscar, of course. McLaren will have to favour Oscar when Max gets closer. Yeah, I mean, I don't think they'll favour Oscar in terms of... the only way they'll favour a driver is if they say, look, drop back, please, give this win to Oscar or whatever, give this P2 to Oscar. Will be if Lando's out of it, or indeed, conversely, if Oscar's out of it and Lando wins the next 3 races. Anything could happen. So let's not get too carried away at the moment. Abdul, here's a change of philosophy. Do you think Ferrari will have the best engine next year, or will it Mercedes be the benchmark? I don't know. How do you 50% electrification? What do I know about that? I know nothing about it. I don't have an electric car. I don't know anything about electric cars. Not that these are electric cars, but I don't think anybody knows. I don't think Ferrari know. I don't think Mercedes know. I think they're all thinking, keep the head down, let's see what happens. Retro Gamer says, just listen to Peter and Cameron chat from yesterday. No comment, but there's a heart there, so I presume that's a positive comment. Reminded me to watch Max Verstappen pole lap at Azerbaijan in mixed conditions. Wow. Oh, good. Great. Almost perfect precision, short cornering, floating the car, balance, back from rear, loaded rear tyres before accelerating, shaving each corner down to millimetres from the wall. What a joy to watch is Max. Absolutely. And as I said, they love to do that closest to the wall thing. They show the measurement of coming out. And it's one thing to be super close to the wall when you've got the power on sort of Liam Lawson, Carlos Sainz way, or even Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, and you've got slight oversteer. And it's another thing to do what Max does, where he's generated the angle of attack, if you like, at the transition point, much easier, rotation point, and he's just going in a straight line to that point by the wall. And you can do that lap after lap after lap after lap. Whereas the other one, you're always, great to watch, but it's not as precise as Max. David Joe Klotz. Hi, Mr. Windsor. How do you define... Oh, Mr. Windsor. Peter, please. How do you define Jody Scheckter as a driver? Short corners. He reached Formula 1 quickly, won the 5,000 title, 73. If not for Fittipaldi crashing into him, would have won his 3rd Grand Prix. They talk about the French Grand Prix in 73 when he and Emerson crashed going into that last corner of the lap. And he was leading the pack, wasn't he? In that M23. I think it was his first race in the M23, wasn't it? It was in the M19 before that, I think. How do I find Jody as a driver? Oh, very Carlos Sainz-y, oversteery, wide, but found a good sweet spot. Amazing car control. Very, very confident in his own ability, and not afraid to pick up a car by the scruff of the neck and drive it into the middle distance. Merlin Mark 11 Formula Ford, the famous one. Colin Vandervelde car, the Emerson Fittipaldi car, brilliantly good in that. And one of his best wins to me was in the McLaren F2 car at Crystal Palace Formula 2. Not a beautiful Ralph Bellamy car, but not the easiest car to drive from reports, and yet he won that race. That epic 70, whatever that was, I guess it was 70, I don't know, when he won the 5,000 title, 75 I think, was it, maybe? Anyway, he was against Mario Alonso, Brian Redman, unbelievably quick as well, very underrated, but what a great Formula 5000 series. And Jody, fabulous in that, in the Trojan. Very good in the Can-Am, the 91710. Just good in everything he drove. But he wasn't what I would call a finessey front-end driver, never. But he certainly, by the time he got to Ferrari, he was a wolf even. He was absolutely knew what he could do and how to drive within that sweet spot. And learnt very quickly. He was self-critical. I like Jody a lot. I had a lot of great conversations with him. I wrote a column with him actually for about 18 months when Nick Britton was managing him in the Ferrari years actually. And that column was for Car and Driver from memory. A monthly column. I used to ring him up. I'll go down to Monaco and we do the column. He was great. And he always had, interesting things. Amazing at the time. He and his brother Ian were married to 2 sisters. What are the odds of that happening? I suppose it happens, doesn't it? But Jody was good. And then I had that amazing day with Jody and Jill when I went down to Monaco and drove in Jody's chocolate brown Ferrari with Jill from Monaco. They were both testing at Fiorano that day in Italy. And we drove from Monaco to Fiorano and then back in the day, and I was in the back seat, and they both drove, and I wrote that article for Autocar. That was 79 obviously, and it was a fun thing, and we were running short of fuel on the way back on the Autostrada in Italy, and as racing drivers do, I've never been with a race driver in a road car who doesn't want to run as far as they can on an empty fuel gauge before they reluctantly have to stop and pull into a garage. It's just a race driver's thing. Well, used to be anyway. I don't know whether they're like that today. Probably not. But they were then, and everything had to be on the limit. And sure enough, this Ferrari is going down, and suddenly it starts coughing and misfiring, and Jody, the thing just stops, and he cruises to the left into the hard shoulder, and absolutely perfect. This is why he won the World Championship in 79. I mean, everything just fell open for him. As he pulls onto the hard shoulder, it was one of those parking areas where you can actually go in, and there's a little parking area. And there's a family there with a Fiat 132 and a guy and the wife and the 2 kids having a picnic. It's like 6 o'clock at night having a picnic. It's all out there. And Jody just pulls up in this Ferrari. The guy can't believe it. It's a Ferrari. Then Jody Scheckter and Gilles Villeneuve get out of the car. And Jody walks up to him and says, "You don't have any gasolina, fuel, benzina." And the guy says, see. He goes to the boot of the 132. The guy's got, a spare thing of fuel in the back. Jody takes it, puts it in the Ferrari, drives off. Talk about it. He actually said something, which I won't repeat, as he drove away. Gilles was sort of shaking his head, thinking, no chance for me this year, no chance. And then later on, as we're getting to Monaco, there's all these tunnels. You're still on the motorway, but there's some very fast corners. I think even Jody was braking for them, and it's motorway. There's two-lane autostrada, but you go through these tunnels all on the high motorway there, and we go through a tunnel. And we're turning in, and it's literally from the left side of the road to the apex, and there's a guy just stopped right in the middle of the tunnel, and Jody does one of these and flicks it, and the back end comes out, and he misses it. And Jill just says, "Jody, you missed the apex there by about 3 meters. What are you doing?" Oh, they were the days, weren't they? And I'm in the back, totally confident in Mr. Jay Scheckter and what he's doing. No worries at all. Yeah. Anyway, JS, I'm going to have to finish with this one. It looks super complicated and technical. Hi, Peter. Do you see the differences in how Lewis approached short corners and Charles and Max approached short corners? Does Lewis brake harder later, so encounter more issue on entry? Others take less speed in and more aggressive. Yeah, I think that is the case today in the Ferrari. Not in the Mercedes 2021 or 20 or 19 or 18. But today, yes. And he's got into that, whether it's because he's a bit older and he just wants to have, and older is nothing to do with reflexes or anything like that. It's just that he's been racing for so long that he thinks about it more than he used to. There's more of a win-loss ratio in everything he does because he thinks about it. Whereas before it was all just instinctive. And now it's, I'm on a street circuit, track's a bit green, traffic here, he just turns in a little bit wider, and if you're turning in a little bit wider, you brake a little bit more in a straight line. If you're braking in a straight line, you brake maybe a little bit later just to compensate, and then you're looking to get the power on as soon as, and then all of a sudden you're not doing what you used to do. Now, part of that is the habits he got into, forced into, post-22 at Mercedes. And he's driving, I would say he's driving better now than he did in 22, 23, 24 at Mercedes. But I don't think he's driving as well as he did in 21. I don't think he's there yet. I don't think he has that level of confidence to be able to just drive in on the front of the car as Charles does. Now, some of that may well be related to the Brembo brakes that he's had to get used to and the feel of the Brembo pedal, which typically, as I understand it, is a bit softer than the feel of the Carbon Industry brake pedal. And I know that he's been working, or Brembo doing all they can. Ferrari aren't going to do what McLaren did for Fernando Alonso and switch to Carbon Industry brakes. They went from Hitco to Carbon Industry at McLaren to accommodate Alonso. But obviously Ferrari are not going to leave Brembo and go to Carbon Industry for Lewis. But what they're trying to do is to get the Brembo brakes to have a harder pedal, just to get more retardation, instant retardation for Lewis, which is what he's kind of used to, I guess, because that's what Fernando complained about when he went there from the Hitcos he was used to at Renault, and I think that's starting to show a little bit at Baku. I think throw in a few engine braking things they can do as well, and he's a bit more confident going into the corners. So again, let's keep watching Lewis. Let's see if he continues to be sort of there or thereabouts with Charles, which is the only yardstick we have, because there's no point relating him to a Red Bull or a Mercedes. You've got to relate him to his teammate. And at the moment, based on Baku, he's not far away from Charles, if not slightly ahead of Charles. So, there we go. Okay. Rami Kala, finish with him. What advice do you have for someone trying to get into motorsport journalism? I was accredited for ELMS recently at Silverstone, only to turn up and be told I don't deserve to be there. Oh, that's not very nice, is it? It's a very difficult question to answer, because in reality you can cover the races without actually going to them these days because of the internet, and because you can have your own website, which is the equivalent of having your own magazine in the old days, or your own TV channel, YouTube, which is equivalent, it's a big thing to have. And you can make your own observations, and you can ring some drivers, have them on WhatsApp. You can do a lot of stuff if you get yourself organized. Bernie Ecclestone a long time ago said that he didn't think journalists belonged at race meetings and they should all be in one centralized building in the middle of London or something and cover the races from there. And I think, by and large, a lot of the series these days kind of agree with that. They don't obviously have that opportunity, and that doesn't exist. But I don't think race organisers for any championship, let alone Formula One, are particularly concerned about looking after the media and the press in the way they used to be. I can remember ringing up various circuits of the world, not Formula One, but just other stuff, whether it be IndyCar or sports cars or Formula 3, whatever, saying I'd love to come to a race. Could I please pick up a pass and, oh yeah, welcome, love to see you. It was always that. But as you say, I get it as well. I'd love to come. Well, who are you? What's your background? What have you done? And Nigel Roebuck gets it as well. He applies for passes. And who are you? Give us your CV. People that, shouldn't be asking that of Nigel Roebuck. And so it is very frustrating. And that's why I say it's quite a difficult question to answer, because I don't really know the answer anymore. I would say generally go to races, beaver up and down the pit lane, talk to everybody, get to know everybody, introduce yourself, get as much information as you can. But then where do you put it? There's so many websites, there's so many YouTube channels, there's so much stuff out there. It's very difficult to find the right way of doing it. So I would say believe in yourself, do it for yourself, ask the questions that you would want to have answered if you weren't at that race meeting. Why did this guy win? What was the factor behind it? And just don't look too much at ratings or views or numbers. Just believe in yourself, believe in your sport and your love of the sport, and things will start to work. Never give up would be the main thing. That's what Jim Clark said to me, like when I was lucky enough to chat to him in '68. I told him a very similar question to you. I said, I want to be involved in motor racing. I'm thinking of being a journalist. And Jim said, well, go for it, 100%. Never give up. Always believe in yourself, and keep your head down. And I've tried to follow that philosophy ever since. Look where it got me. Anyway, there we go. Big thanks to everybody. I'm going to have to stop there, I'm afraid. Got so many other things going on as ever. And a big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to TrackNinja, and of course to REC Watches for their support, and to you, the viewer, for your support. Try and do another live stream maybe early next week before Singapore. Till then, take care. See you soon.